The pots are dry now, so I'm just going to put the finishing touches to them. As I say, I've painted them as if they're in bright sunlight, but I'm also going to add some cast shadows. Just need to darken this under this rim. So what happens with the cast shadow on a pot is that it has a crisp, sharp edge at the top, and then at the bottom it tends to be blended in. So I'm using the same colour as I used on the pot itself, but with just a touch of purple. I'm controlling how much paint and water I've got on the brush with my tissue again. Because I've made that darker, the rim's got to be a little bit darker as well, otherwise it looks odd. And there we go, that pot looks about right to me. The other thing that we can do is that we can pretend to make this scene look more summery and more interesting. We can pretend that it's all under a big tree. So I'm just going to put a few cast shadows of, a few cast shadows of leaves. I'm just going to put that pattern on this green glazed pot here with a bit of raw sienna and a smaller brush. This pot at the end, I'm just going to pretend that these flowers in front of the pot are casting a shadow. Okay, so I think that's about the pots done, more or less. And now I'm going to have a go at doing the wall behind the plants at the bottom. I'm going to choose a flat brush to do this, I think. The top of the wall is stone-coloured concrete flags. So I'll use raw sienna, raw umber. Obviously that's too yellowy, so I'll dull it down with a bit of French ultramarine. And again, on the photograph, this wall is in shadow, but I'm going to just cheat a bit and paint it as if it's actually a little bit more in the sun. And that all looks far too uniform, doesn't it? So what I'm going to do next is blot it a bit so that it looks a little bit more textured. Now it seems to me that I've painted this pot with a saucer that shouldn't be there, so I have to correct that. And all I'm going to do is just paint over it in a darker colour. And one of the problems with working with watercolour is it is difficult to correct mistakes, but it isn't impossible by any means. And because I've darkened that there, if I darken it up here a bit as well, it perhaps won't look quite so odd. I think I've just about got away with that. Can't see too much of the green. Next to the wall, it's a brick wall. That's quite a nice thing to paint. Very warm, rich, reddy browns. I'm only going to paint some of the wall at this stage because I've got the problem of the very detailed petals and leaves in front of the wall. So I'm just going to put the main bricks in at this stage. I haven't drawn any of the bricks in because I can just guess at the sizes of them really, what looks right. Of course, bricks aren't all the same colour, so we've got to be careful to make them all slightly different so that they look more realistic and more interesting. The other thing I'm going to do with show you with these bricks is a nice little trick. If you blot them and wet them, and then drop a little bit of salt on, and leave that to dry, it'll have a, well, we'll see what it looks like. It does give it a nice textural look. One of the reasons I'm blotting it is the fact that the surface will then be uneven in terms of dryness. Some of the brick will be drier than other parts, which means that the salt will behave differently depending on exactly how dry the paint is. It does seem to slow down the drying process as well, so it might be an hour before we can see what that really looks like. I'm just going under my wire netting now. I'm only going to do a couple more bricks before I start doing some work on the flowers, because you have to sort of work them a bit at a time, brick, flower, so that you don't paint yourself into a corner. So there we go. Let's just blow the salt off. So to work with bright, pure colours, you either need to do those first or to clean your palette and clean your water so that there's no chance that the flowers will look muddy. So I've put out some pinks and reds and purples for these flowers. So we've got permanent rose, permanent magenta and ultramarine violet. We might as well start over here. These flowers are actually, there's quite a lot of white flowers on the photograph. I'm going to paint some of them in different colours. Again, I don't want to paint every single petal. Just adding a bit of French ultramarine for this purple flower. A bit dark, isn't it? So we'll just... I've put out my greens and I've been tempted to do the stem now, so I'm going to start just putting the stem in. It's partly because I wanted the purple and the green to run into each other. If I don't do it when it's wet, I'll lose the opportunity to do that. So a real thorough wash of the brush now to go back to my bright colours and come to these pink flowers at the bottom here. Purpley pink. So the centre of the flower is lots and lots and lots of tiny little petals. So I'm blotting and dropping water on to get that impression. Lots of little petals. And these flowers are then surrounded by paler, larger petals. So the watery paint, because it's so watery, it's given me a very pale pink. Just going to darken some bits of this. So the shade on the white flowers, obviously they're not going to be solid white all across. We're going to use blue and yellow, a mixture or a combination of the two colours. To put the shadow on that, on the petals of the white flowers. They're too dark, it's too grey looking. So we'll just blot that off a bit. There's some little thistle type flowers on the photograph. They're sort of a magenta colour. And we can just dot those on. And give them a spray, just to soften them down a bit. It's another quick way of doing flowers, just dots of colour and spraying. So with a triangular shaped brush that comes to a very sharp point, while the paper is still wet from the spray, I'm going to just work on the the stems of the thistles. These pink flowers over here are dry, so I'm just going to finish them off with a few shadows on them. So I think we need to put leaves on now. I'm going to do a few with this round flat brush. I don't want them all to be the same shape, so I'm going to go back to a round brush, smaller round brush, and put some in with that. Got quite a lot of muddly shapes here, so I think we just keep building up this foliage and the leaves bit at a time with different brushes. I can rub my salt off. Soften that a bit because it's in the distance. Well, whoops, a bit too much. Maybe a flower on top. So we'll leave that to dry and then I'll just put the background in and finish it off with some body colour, I think.
Now available to buy. Try these techniques at home whenever you wish. The extended DVD of today's workshop and the book that accompanies this series are now available from the Painting and Drawing channel. For further information and to order your copy, go to www.paintingdrawingchannel.com.